Good morning, everybody. If I haven't met you, I'm Carla, and I'm one of the ministers here. I am not the person who usually speaks, so if you're new here, come back again. Try us again, Laura. But I just want to say good morning, and we're still walking through this Peter's life. So we're going to walk through Simon Peter's work in progress. And this week, we're going to visit two different spots in his story, but they're really connected. Before we do get started, I feel like I should be transparent. I am going to cheer for the Patriots today. I know. I needed to confess that because I spent a lot of my life saying never. I would never do that. And then in the fall, I visited Boston for my birthday, and I fell in love with that city. And I thought, you know what? We're past the BB era. That Belichick Brady thing. So I bought a sweatshirt. I'm going home and putting that sweatshirt on, and we're hoping for that best for that baby quarterback. Okay? All right. But really, I do want to be transparent with you all this morning, and I want to tell you a little bit about what's been going on with me, because I have found myself in Peter's story, or I think it's maybe better to say that I found Peter in my story this week. Isn't that how faith is supposed to work, though? If it's not relevant to our own personal lives, it starts to feel like something that's antiquated, something that we admire and place up on this pedestal and put it in this prominent place in our lives, but it doesn't feel essential to our everyday lives. And that's just not how I experience faith at all. It might sound cliche or trite, but I experience God in the mundane, in the ordinary, and in the extraordinary parts of life. I find God to be both awe-inspiring and unimposing. You know that feeling? Like, I'm sure most of you do. Like, it's similar to how I feel about some of my friends. It's how I feel about my wife, Krista. Because one minute, she will be on the couch with a plate full of cookies. And I mean it when I say plate full. And she will be playing PlayStation. And then all of a sudden, she answers a call. And she's suddenly explaining how to do a TCAR stroke prevention procedure and using intricate words like bifurcation, neo-intimal hyperplasia, and amaurosis fugax. I knew she was going to say I said that wrong. Thanks. I tried. I do people. Okay, I don't do those things. So they are having fun. Krista is both ordinary and extraordinary, right? And that's how I find Jesus showing up in Peter's story this week. He's both mysterious and unmistakable. And the first place that we find him is in Jerusalem. And he's having what is probably the worst day of his life up to this point. As Matthew's gospel tells it, guys, there was like, whatever that was, Jeremy played, and now there's children. And this is going to be very serious. So I'm going to try for that anyway. But anyway, we find him here in Matthew's gospel. It says that Jesus has been taken, right? He's been arrested, and Peter is now following him. And 3 different times, someone says, hey, weren't you with him? Or don't you know him? And Peter every time says, I do not. He denies that he knows him. And on that 3rd time, Jesus turns and looks at him. And in that moment, when they make eye contact, Peter remembers, Jesus told me that I was going to disown him 3 times. The scripture says that Peter walks away and weeps bitterly. And the translation for that is like an excruciating, painful heartbreak. Simply put, Peter is broken. When we then pick up Peter's story, it's after the resurrection. We're in John chapter 21. And in the previous chapter, the disciples are hiding because they are living in fear that the Jewish leaders are going to come for them next. And that's where we pick up the story. John says, later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. This is how it happened. Several of the disciples were there. Simon Peter, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples. Simon Peter said, I'm going fishing. We'll come too, they all said. So they went out in the boat, but they caught nothing all night. So here we are back at the Sea of Galilee. Peter's gone back to what he knows, what is familiar. And I have to tell you that I've had notes and research done for this sermon for several weeks now. I actually had it all lined out with this great comparison to football for Super Bowl Sunday and everything. But I have to tell you about my last week and the way that Peter stepped into my life. I spent this last week on a solo retreat. I planned this retreat back in December, and I fully intended to head toward the mountains because I love the mountains, and they are always a place of renewal for me. However, as I began to plan, I was just completely drawn to the beach. And not just any beach, but Ocean Isle Beach, North Carolina. This is the beach where my family has gone almost every year since I was a child. There's a familiarity there for me. I know it almost as well as I know my hometown. And my mom loved Ocean Isle very much. So there was also this sense of wanting to be close to my mom who passed away last summer. In some way, it's something I felt I needed. So I planned that trip for the first week of January. And as most of us are aware, that first week of January, we lost our beloved Jenny. So I canceled my beach retreat, but it was non-refundable. So I had to reschedule. That first week of January is chill, right? But this week, it felt like it was going to be an inconvenience. That first week, it's all downtime and there's not a lot going on. But going this week felt like a disruption. But still, I didn't want to lose that money. So I went. I had plans to sit on this chilly beach and to meditate and center and just breathe in the peace of this place that I knew so well. But I also was going to write this sermon. And in the way that only God's timing works, this was the perfect week for me to get away. Because I have been so very heavy. This was the first holiday without my mom, and it was one full of grief. Then we lost Jenny. Then I walked beside some dear friends and loved ones who experienced unfairness in ways that felt like truth and redemption no longer matter in our world. It was heavy. On top of that, we've witnessed injustice in our world. My heart just cannot handle children being detained and helpers being killed. I am heavy. I've dedicated my life to truth and justice and redemption. I do not know how to function in a world without the hope of those things, without the hope that that still matters. That's been the condition of my heart for several weeks. And that's the condition it was as I packed my bags and headed to North Carolina. And then that's where Peter and I collided. You see, I had this sermon all outlined and prepared about how Peter had retreated back to the Sea of Galilee and back to fishing because of his mistakes, because he was feeling shame of his denials. I've always seen Peter as this guy who messed up, and he did. He did. And so I thought this was him just regressing. I felt like he assumed that his denial was just too much, so he had to go back to fishing. Jesus was gone. His disciple days were over. And that's always the accusation I put on him. But I think I misunderstood him until this week. Because Peter's me, and maybe Peter's you. I've been living with this heaviness of grief and empathy that's felt like too much to carry. And what did I do? I retreated to the familiarity of the beach. A place where I could remember my mom. I understood Peter in a way this week that I never have before. This is a man grieving and afraid. He watched his rabbi and his best friend be murdered. He has watched injustice on a cataclysmic level. The truth is that he spent 3 years with the Messiah, watching miracles, watching the pure embodiment of love, and yet he's gone. How does Peter live in a world without that hope? So what does he do? He retreats to the familiarity of the beach. Undoubtedly, he remembers his time with Jesus while on the Sea of Galilee. This is the place where Jesus found him. This is the place where Jesus called him. This is where Peter himself miraculously stepped out and walked on water to get to his rabbi and friend. This is where Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount. Peter's broken, and he returns to the familiar. He's us. We are him. Our world is grim. We are all experiencing grief collectively, and we're also experiencing it in our personal lives. Not just the death of people, but we grieve peace. We grieve justice and security and the loss of loved ones because of political divides. The list can go on and on. But this is not the end of the story. This is not the end of Peter's, it's not the end of mine, and it's not the end of yours. John goes on and says, at dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, fellows, have you caught any fish? No, they replied. Then he said, throw out your net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you'll get some. So they did. They couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. We've heard this story before, right? This is almost exactly how Jesus calls Peter. And then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped for work, jumped into the water, and headed to shore. In their grief, in their pain, in their heaviness, Jesus shows up. But he doesn't just show up. He sought them out. He knows them. He found them. The last time these guys saw Jesus was in Jerusalem. Now they're back on the Sea of Galilee. This is estimated a 4 to 5 day walk. They didn't just text him and say, hey, headed out of Jerusalem, going home, But he knew them. He knew where they would be. He knew that they needed the comfort of familiarity. When we find ourselves in the midst of fear and anxiety, pain, sorrow, one of the best ways to send ourselves back to this place of grounded calm is to return to what is familiar. Familiar places make it easy to relax. They reduce our stress and anxiety, and they activate that restful state in our body. Peter and I found ourselves on the beach for that. And what did Jesus do next? Well, he sounded a lot like my mom. He said, here, honey, you need some food. When they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them. Fish cooking over a charcoal fire and some bread. Bring some of the fish you've just caught, Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to the shore. There were 153 large fish, and yet the net hadn't torn. Now come and have some breakfast, Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. This was the third time Jesus had appeared to his disciples since he had been raised from the dead. I think this part is so special. Jesus knows exactly what we need, and he wants to serve it to us. Peter and the others, they'd been out all night fishing. I'm sure they were hungry, so Jesus provided fish and bread and a fire, exactly what they needed that morning. When we were in the Holy Land, we visited this spot, and I know you're all going to be shocked, but they built a church on top of it. This is the church of the primacy of St. Peter, and that big rock is where this story is believed to have taken place, and it is called Mensa Christi, the table of Christ. So it looked a little different for me than it did for Peter this week. See, a month or two ago, while reading a book, I came across this simple description of a prickly pear cactus. Now, lest you think me super holy, reading profound books all the time, this was a rom-com. It was supposed to be an escape. Brain Cheetos, as Krista calls it. But everything is sacred in some way. So that's where I found one of the most important symbols that I've come across in a while. The prickly pear cactus. It produces beautiful flowers and this really sweet fruit, but it's also very painful. But it's so beautiful. Beauty and pain. This is what the author wrote. Life is the prickly pear. It's always going to be a combination of beauty and hurt, no matter how hard you try to protect yourself from the hard parts. I latched onto that, and I've shared it with several people since then because that's how I've been experiencing life lately. Once we got our Christmas tree up and decorated, we turned off the lights and we just sat there together, like just looking at the beauty of the tree and thinking about all of our ornaments on there. And we sat there for a while and Krista looked over at me and she said, "Isn't this so peaceful?" And what she didn't know is that I was sitting there quietly crying. Because see, my mom absolutely loved Christmas. And that childlike awe that you get when you see your tree for the first time, it just took me back. But Krista was right. It was incredibly peaceful. And I felt deep sorrow, beauty and pain. The prickly pear. Like I said earlier, I entered this week of retreat carrying this great heaviness. So I shared it with my spiritual director while I was there. And I told her that I've been grieving and I've been carrying all this weight of empathy. And I found it so hard to find hope in a world where truth doesn't always seem to matter. I said, I don't want to become apathetic, but I must find a way to carry what I'm supposed to and let go of what is not mine. I told her about my prickly pear and how I had this opportunity to talk to you all about Peter today and how I was identifying so closely with him this week. I told her I was going to share with you all about how Jesus found Peter there in his grief and fed him. He knew exactly what he needed. And one of the last things she said to me before our call ended was, "Carla, I hope Jesus feeds you breakfast on the beach this week." I said, "He will." I was confident. But the next day, everything felt off. I slept through sunrise. It was very cold and rainy and windy. Guys, it was colder on that beach than it was here on Thursday. I took a walk on that beach. I could barely stand the wind. It was tears just like coming down my eyes, but I really tried. So it was not the day I expected. Everything felt a little wrong. So that night as I was packing up, I was going to head home the next morning. I was thinking, I have this long drive tomorrow. I'll have time to process all of this and see what all this disappointment from the day meant and get some clarity or whatever. I woke up the next morning to head back home, and it was right around sunrise, and I thought, well, I know it's been super dreary the whole time I've been here, but maybe, just maybe, there's a sunrise. So when I opened the door, the sky was on fire, and it was so beautiful. So I quickly ran inside and got some hat and bundled up, and I walked back out there, and I was just standing. I was just breathing on this balcony and just looking and listening to the waves. And I glanced down, and you know what I saw? I was like so stunned that I immediately grabbed my phone and I Googled, what kind of cactus is on the beach in North Carolina? But I already knew what the answer was going to be. It's a dune prickly pear. I stood there laughing and crying all at the same time. Jesus had fed me breakfast on the beach. Let's hear the last part of this story. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know I love you." "Then feed my lambs," Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said. "You know I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. A third time, He asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. He said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you," Jesus said. "Then feed my sheep. I tell you the truth. When you were young, you were able to do as you like. You dressed yourself and went wherever you wanted to go. But when you're old, you will stretch out your hands, and others will dress you and take you where you don't want to go." Jesus said this to let him know by what kind of death he would glorify God. And then Jesus told him, "Follow me." There's a statue placed in the garden beside the Church of the Primacy. It depicts this moment between Jesus and Peter, this restoration, this redemption moment. Jesus asked 3 times, and I'm sure that sparks something in Peter as he remembers his 3 denials. But I believe there might be something even a little more woven into those quotations or those questions as well. Because if Peter was anything like me, he'd lost some hope. How do we move forward in a world that seems like it's lost its light? Do you love me? Take care of the vulnerable. Do you love me? Take care of your neighbor. Do you love me? Take care of people. Jesus wants Peter to remember who he is. Peter is a man who loves Jesus. He loves him enough to step out on the water to get to him, to raise a sword to protect him, to follow him to his death. And no matter what happened or what mistakes Peter made, he still has purpose. Once again, Jesus extends this invitation to Peter, "Follow me." It is undoubtedly going to look different this time for Peter than he thought it would. The first time he was called, he was expecting this earthly kingdom and a place beside a king and freedom from Rome. But instead, he finds himself in uncertainty and brokenness and grief. We are all living in circumstances as individuals and a community and a society that I can safely say we never expected. We have faced death. We have lost friends, churches to denominational divides. We have fractured family relationships because of political polarization. We have felt displaced by lies. I know I have. We have had our fair share of pain. But oh, there's so much beauty, right? There's so much beauty. I want to know where you've seen beauty recently. It's not a rhetorical question. Where have you seen beauty? Anybody willing to share? Yeah. She said the innocent, random laughter of children. I heard somebody over here. Sunrise. Somebody else? Golden retrievers. I will second that. I think Beth's pointing at her baby. He brings joy to all of us. Come on, look at him. He's a little light. Anybody else? I saw snow on the beach. It's weird, but really beautiful. You know. We might be living in this night, but it's not an everlasting night. There is darkness, but John tells us that the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There is light. Even though I admit it's hard to grasp sometimes, but there is hope. There is brokenness, my friends. And as I look around and see brokenness in every direction, I want to fix it. I want to go to my people and I want to have some magic wand and some abracadabra and then there be no more pain. But that's not what Jesus asked of Peter. Jesus didn't require Peter to find the brokenness and repair it with some magic wand. He met Peter where he was. He took care of him and then he said, "Follow me." Peter, you see how I just took care of you? Now you go do that. Take care of others. Is there brokenness? Yes, there is. Are things shattered around us? Yes, they are. Maybe we can find Peter, maybe you can find him in your story the way that I have. Maybe we follow his example. Maybe we let the broken pieces lay, the ones that are not all ours to fix. Maybe we take time to grieve. We find a familiar place and we return there and we experience excruciating heartbreak. But that's not all, because life is a prickly pear. That's not the end. When you see the light of Jesus, however it looks in your life, however it looks to you, jump out of that boat. Jump out of that. Swim to that light. Let him feed you. And then answer, yes, you know I love you. Yes, you know I love you. Yes, you know I love you. My prayer for you this week is that Jesus feeds you breakfast on the beach. Let's pray. God of love, thank you that you are a God of restoration and a God who knows us and a God who knows where to find us. Thank you that you are a God that provides for everything we need. God, this week and moving on, may we be people that jump out of the boat. We swim to the shore to you. And Jesus, may you feed every one of us breakfast on the beach. Amen.